debate. Senator Wu.
Honourable colleagues, at the risk of spoiling your appetite for the dinner break, let me start my speech and pick up after the dinner break, assuming that we see the clock. Last week, we adopted the Selection Committee report, which resulted in the formation of Senate standing committees. The first report of SELI named senators to the various standing committees according to the proportions that each group constitutes in the Senate. The ISG got roughly 48% of the seats on each committee. The Conservatives got about 20%, the PSG 17%, and the CSG 14%. Non-affiliated senators who wanted to be on committees were offered seats from the allocations that were assigned to the various groups. Every senator who wanted to sit on a committee was offered one or more seats. No one was excluded. But how did a senator get the particular seat on the committee that he or she was assigned? Did that senator have a special claim to that seat? Does any senator have a special right to a seat on a given committee? The answer is obviously no. We know this because all of us went through a process in the last 2 weeks of selecting committees that we wanted to sit on and working through the inevitable conflicts that arise when there are more senators wanting to be on a committee than there are seats available on that committee. Different groups use different protocols for allocating seats to their members, but I am sure every group had to deal with some overlapping interests among members, with the result that most senators did not get all the committees they wanted to be on. That is certainly true of the ISG. While every ISG member got their first choice committee that they selected, few also got their second and third choices. Which brings us to the subject of the second SELI report that we are currently debating. Let's be clear, firstly, that this is a report of the Selection Committee, duly adopted by a majority of the members on that committee, consisting of members from all groups, including non-affiliated senators. The reason SELI issued a standalone report on this issue, as opposed to incorporating the issue into the first SELI report, is because the PSG insisted on separating the issue of portability from the issue of committee formation. The leaders of the other three groups, the Conservatives, the CSG and the ISG, agreed with non-portability of seats, as they had for sessional orders in the previous Parliament. Listening to the polemics on Thursday night, on Tuesday night, you might have come away with the impression that the suspension of portability is an ISG plot masterminded by power-hungry facilitators at the helm of this group. In fact, 3 of the 4 groups in the Senate have supported some version of this report in previous sessions, and the Senate has voted in favor of non-portability each and every time it has come up in this chamber. Colleagues, the committee seat you obtained last week came through a negotiated process within your group that very likely deprived another member of the same group from having that seat. Or to put it in the reverse, the seat you really wanted but did not get is because of the selection process that your group established and which you willingly participated in. As they say, you win some, you lose some. But that was the process you agreed to. It therefore follows, I believe, that if you choose to leave the group, you should, as a matter of fairness, return the seat to the group, so that if needed, the seat can be allocated to a member who is waiting in the queue. Which is why, honourable colleagues, the issue we are debating today is not about the independence of the Senate or the equality of senators. It is about the much more mundane but foundational concept of fair play and procedural integrity. Every time we have to reconstitute committees, as we are doing at the start of the 44th Parliament, we have to solve the problem of scarcity. Scarcity of committee seats in the face of excess demand from senators. You can tell I'm an economist. As it turns out, we have decided to solve this problem by allocating the seats by proportionality to recognized groups in the Senate, and then leaving the groups to work out how they divvy up the seats that they were assigned. This is about boring math, not some high-minded principle as the dissenters to the Selly report have asserted. On the subject of math, let me offer a rebuttal to Senators Mercer, Cordy, and Belmar, who have made claims based on math without actually doing the math. They state correctly that any movement of senators from one group to another will change the proportionality of groups in the Senate and use that as a point to argue for portability. If you actually do the math, however, you will find that the movement of one or two senators does very little to change the actual allocation of seats on our committees. I have done the math, and I can confirm that the ISG would have exactly the same number of members on committees of 9 and 12 and 15 if one or even two members were to leave our group. This is akin to the retirement or passing of a senator, which does not precipitate an immediate change in the distribution of seats on a committee. Now, if a large number of senators were to leave a group, the proportionality numbers would be materially impacted, and a change in seat distribution would be warranted. But this is not unlike the appointment of new senators, which also affects proportionality calculations. The point is, we don't recalculate proportionality every time there is a shift in numbers. Not even, I would say, when the shifts are quite large, as was the case during the last Parliament, when the ISG grew by nearly 20%, even as our allocation of seats on committees remained static. So much for math. Let me now return to the high-minded arguments that my honourable colleagues made on Tuesday night about the independence and equality of senators. We heard from Senator Mercer that a senator is a senator is a senator. As tautologies go, this one is especially seductive. But what does it mean? And more to the point, how is it relevant to the debate at hand? Now, Senator Mercer would presumably argue that a senator deprived of his or her particular committee seat is less equal compared to other senators. But from what dispensation did the senator derive the right to have that committee seat in the first place? Did the Governor-General grant it to him? Is it written in her summons? Do we have a rule that makes that claim? Of course not. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe there even is a rule that says senators must sit on committees. To be clear, I believe that all senators have a right to sit on committees. But I do not believe that any senator has a right to sit on a particular committee. We heard again on Tuesday night the mistaken assertion that this report deprives senators of the right to sit on a committee. It does not. All senators have the right to sit on a committee, including senators who are not part of a group or caucus if they want to sit on a committee. There is no violation of the equality principle. The dissenters would have you believe that equality extends to a senator's right to a particular committee seat. But why should that be the case? Or more importantly, how can that possibly be the case when there are more senators desirous of committee membership than there are seats on that committee? The underlying point here, colleagues, is that while senators may have a right to sit on committees, they do not have an entitlement to any particular committee seat. Seats on particular committees can only be assigned through what is essentially a process of negotiation. For a senator to then assert his or her unalienable right to that seat is a contravention of the negotiated agreement and it's a fallacy of logic as well as an abuse of procedural fairness. I would go further even to say that this conception of portability actually violates the equality principle and undermines Senator Mercer's mantra that a senator is a senator is a senator. The dissenters also argue that this report is about the independence of senators. This is another red herring. Insofar as I am concerned, senators lose their committee seats when they leave a group, not because of their views, but because of the agreement they signed up for when they joined the group. To put it differently, the seats are retrieved from senators because it wasn't theirs to start with. Now, this is not to say that seats will be taken away each time a senator leaves a group. If there is no pent-up demand for the seat from within the group, there's no need to retrieve the seat, and the departing senator can continue to serve on it. Retrieving seats is not about vengeance or punishment. It is about respecting a process and working on a case-by-case basis. I would add that the same applies when a senator joins a group after committee seats have already been assigned, as will be the case when the new appointments to the Senate we are likely to see in the weeks ahead takes place. If any of the new members join the ISG, I know the new leadership, will make all efforts to find seats for them which correspond to their interests. That, too, is a process of internal negotiation which requires equal measure of a clearly defined process and senatorial collegiality. You will recall from Tuesday night's debate that a number of senators dispute my view that we get our seats through our groups by way of a negotiations process. They claim that committee seats don't come from groups, they come from the Senate. Ergo, there is no need to return the seat to the group if a senator should choose to leave that group. I expect some of our newer colleagues are puzzled by this argument, so I will explain it, but that may have to wait until after the dinner break, because I'm looking for the Speaker to now rise and invite us to see the clock.
Good one. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Senator Wu, but pursuant to Rule 3-3, sub 1, I'm required to leave the chair until 7 p.m. Resuming debate on the second report of the Committee of Selection. Senator Wu, for the balance of your time.
Thank you, Your Honour. Colleagues, the point at which I relieved you from your hunger pangs was when I was explaining the difference between my view of how we get our committee seats and the dissenters' view. And if you are puzzled about the dissenters' view, it is the following: that whatever deal caucuses and groups may negotiate, and however that deal may be expressed in the Selly report, it is the Senate that has to give its blessing before the report and the deal can be effected. This is the argument we heard on Tuesday night from a number of colleagues, that no, the groups have nothing to do with giving you Senate seats. It's the Senate that gives you committee seats. But let me ask you this. Did the Senate as a whole come up with the deal? Did the Senate establish the criteria for prioritizing one senator over another for a given seat on a committee? Did the Senate as a whole establish the process by which conflicts over seats on a committee would be resolved? Of course not. All of the difficult work was left to the groups and caucuses. There is no escaping the fact that it is the groups that came up with the mechanism for allocating seats to members. Indeed, that is why Selly exists, as a way to formally introduce to the Senate agreements that have been made by the groups and caucuses. To then say that one has no responsibility to the group because the Senate made the final decision is at best a dodge, or worse, a dereliction. It's a little bit like saying you don't have to pay the real estate brokerage a commission on the house that they helped you negotiate a good price on, because the ultimate decision to sell the house was in the hands of the previous owner. Now, if you still need convincing, let's imagine a scenario where the Senate actually rejects a SELI report on the formation of committees. In fact, think about what would have happened if last week's SELI report number 1 was rejected by the Senate. Do you think the Senate would then resolve into a committee of the whole to try and decide who gets to go on which committee? Of course not. What would happen is that groups and caucuses would have to go back to the negotiating table to hammer out a fresh deal, to assign seats to their members based on the new deal, and they would have to again bring it to SELI as a report to be tabled in the Senate. There is no escaping the fact that committee seats are negotiated among groups, and the filling of those seats is a process that is internal to the group. It is in this sense that a committee seat belongs to the group rather than to the senator. Now, this is not a statement about favoring groups over individuals. It is a statement about the reality of how Senate committee seats are allocated. Colleagues, I will grant that there is a way in which one could argue that portability is an issue of independence, as our PSG colleagues have argued. But it is in this narrow sense that senators insist on being liberated from any responsibility they have to the group from which the seat was obtained. In effect, these senators believe that they have an absolute right to that particular seat on the committee, regardless of how the seat was obtained. Never mind that other senators were deprived of that very seat because they too followed the agreed-upon protocol for seat assignment within the group. In my opinion, though, this is not senatorial independence. It is senatorial libertarianism. Now, for most observers outside the Senate, this debate is arcane and seemingly trivial, but I think it gets at some important underlying questions about what it means to have a more independent Senate. A good way to begin thinking about this question is to consider the phrase employed by Senators Mercer and Cordy, that the group exists to serve senators, not the other way around. That sounds almost as good as a senator is a senator is a senator. But what does it mean? Is it that senators join a group solely for the purpose of extracting benefits that are distributed by the Senate via that group? Is the purpose of being a member of the Conservatives, or a member of the ISG, or the CSG, or the PSG, principally to get a committee seat? Is it to get on the executive of a parliamentary association, to be considered for overseas travel, to access prime office space in East Block of Victoria Building? Is that what you mean by the group is there to serve the senator? Colleagues, is it not conceivable, even desirable, that a senator should think about his or her membership in a group as one which includes serving the purposes of the group? Have we become so atomistic and self-absorbed that we see our role only as independent, freewheeling senators with no responsibility to a larger collective? Is the future of the Senate one in which groups are purely platforms to assist members to carry out transactions? That would seem to me to be a very shallow view of Senate reform, and a self-centered one too. Perhaps I'm betraying my cultural roots, but I believe in the importance and value of a collective and of the responsibility that comes with belonging to a group. I joined a group, not just because of what the group could do for me, but for how it gave me the opportunity to become a better senator by working with like-minded colleagues. Now, this is the point in my speech where some of you may be thinking, Senator Wu wants us to take us back to the bad old days of caucuses. Since I'm the outgoing facilitator of the ISG, what I say has little bearing on the future direction of my group. But in any case, the boogeyman argument that stronger groups translate into abusive caucus behavior is yet another red herring. I understand some senators are still recovering from the PTSD PTSD of abusive caucus behavior. But it is entirely possible for senators to exercise independent decision-making on bills and motions while belonging to a group that values working together and has rules to foster collaboration based on fairness, respect, and decency. That is, in fact, how I would define the ISG. Fairness, respect, collegiality, democratic practices, even in the context of a highly structured group, are not antithetical to an independent Senate. In this context, I was troubled to hear in Senator Cordy's speech her insinuation of some sinister motivation behind the Selly report that is before us. She suggests that in supporting this report, the ISG is trying to prevent senators from being more independent. I reject this insinuation categorically. In what universe does fair play have to conflict with independence? Are senators who respect and abide with fairness of procedure not exercising a form of independence that includes the responsibility that comes with it? Some of you probably feel that portability is a necessary condition for a more modern and independent Senate, and you are inclined to vote against the report because of that sentiment. You know, the very term portability has a nice ring to it. It has positive connotations, and it seems to go with the concept of independence. I can, in fact, think of situations where portability would, in fact, be the desired model for committee seat assignment. But that does not mean portability is right for all models of committee seat assignment, and certainly not for the current model that we employ. The fact is, when portability clashes with fairness, I think fairness should prevail. Another way of putting it is as follows. Does your right to stay on the committee of your choice trump your responsibility to the group from which you derived your seat? Now, how you answer this question will depend on your relative weighting of individual versus group rights. This is an ancient problem in philosophy. I accept that some of you prioritize your individual rights, and that is fair enough. But I do not accept that this report undermines the independence of the Senate or the equality of senators. Let me move to the next red herring. What should we make of the fact that the current rules allow for portability? Previous speakers have pointed out that portability is a decades-old practice of the Senate, and they are right. But defending portability on the grounds that it is tradition is very different from defending portability on the grounds that it makes sense. With due respect, I have heard a lot from senators about the importance of adherence to a traditional practice, but they have said very little about why the practice makes sense in the current context of how we actually assign seats to senators. It would seem that they are arguing in favor of tradition for tradition's sake, which is a curious position for pro-modernization senators to take. At best, the argument in favor of portability, based on the fact that it's currently in the rules, isn't really an argument. It's simply a restatement of the status quo. If you are for modernization, then you have to be open to the idea that some of our rules are not fit for purpose. Rule 12-2(3) on portability is one such rule that is ripe for reconsideration. It is even more curious that the proponents of this rule, 12-2(3), are generally silent on 12-5. Allow me to get a little technical here. Rule 12-5 allows the leadership of a caucus or group to replace a senator or a committee with a stroke of a pen, regardless of whether that senator is leaving the caucus or group. In the hierarchy of draconian actions, 12-5 surely trumps 12-2(3). But it is in the rules, and it has been in the rules for at least as long as 12-2(3). In fact, portability would be useless to a senator who was stripped of his or her seat before that senator had a chance to leave the group. Now, I'm not advocating for or defending 12-5 as such, but I'm pointing out the inconsistency in an argument that is dogmatic in its defense of the portability rule, but silent on the potentially more insidious twin rule that is 12-5. In fact, Senator Cordy has previously argued that 12-5 is an acceptable exception to the portability rule 12-2(3), which is tantamount to saying, if we're really worried about senators who may be thinking of leaving with their seats, let's take those seats away before they do. Even if you take Senator Cordy's more evolved position that she articulated on Thursday, in which she says she's open to revisiting 12-5, one has to question how she can defend 12-2(3) on the grounds of tradition while challenging 12-5, which is no less steeped in that tradition. I want to clarify that I'm not against the concept of portability. In fact, I can think of a scenario where portability of committees is justified because it does not violate procedural integrity and fairness among senators. That scenario is where senators are assigned their seats through an all-Senate process rather than through group negotiations. In that situation, one could make the case that seats belong to individual senators for the duration of the session. But that is not how we assign committee seats currently. Portability, you see, is an attractive concept. I would say it's even a seductive concept, but it has to be fit for purpose. Perhaps we can move towards a selection process that is more fit for portability, but that is some ways off. In the meantime, we should design rules that fit the actual circumstances of our practice rather than an idealized version of what that practice could be. To sum up, much as some would like to make this report about Senate independence and senatorial autonomy, the less glamorous reality is that committee seat assignment is a routine scarcity problem that has to be solved through negotiations. Negotiations only work if the parties subject themselves to the rules of the negotiated agreement and respect both the outcomes and the procedures that led to those outcomes. If there is a principle at stake in this motion, this report, this debate, it is the principle of procedural fairness. Senators do not have a divine right to a given committee seat. They receive that seat on a particular committee by willingly participating in a group process that resulted in a favorable outcome for them, but at the expense of other senators. If they leave that group, the seat should not go with them. That is the intent of the Shelley report we have been asked to vote on, and that is why I support it. Thank you.
Senator Wu, there are senators who wish to ask questions. Will you take questions?
Yes, of course.
Senator Patterson, question?
Thank you, thank you, Senator Wu, for the thoughtful and erudite speech. I got to remember senatorial libertarianism, but you spoke in praise of the system for assigning committee seats to senators, but this also includes the very important question of selecting chairs and deputy chairs. And that's not an easy task, being a chair or deputy chair. I don't need to tell anyone. You need to have a rigorous understanding of the parliamentary process, respect for a balanced and respectful approach and order in the committee. And yet we've had total rookie senators appointed to important committees with no experience whatsoever in these areas in the parliamentary process. So I'd like to ask you, Senator Wu, would you say that the current selection process, and in particular the selection of chairs and deputies, is based on merit, or is more based on group affiliation and a kind of popularity contest vote from the groups regardless of experience or merit?
Senator Wu.
date.
Thank you, Senator Patterson, for your question. I cannot speak for your group, but I can tell you definitively that in the ISG, chairs and deputy chairs that are designated to the ISG through the negotiation process are selected through a democratic process by the members of that committee, and they know that the important criteria have to do with expertise. They have to do with the ability to chair meetings. They have to do with real-life experience. And I'm very confident that ISG members make wise decisions in choosing their chairs and deputy chairs.
Senator Patterson, did you have a supplementary? Senator Bellemare.
Thank you, Mr.
Merci, Monsieur le
Senator Bellemare. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's certain that the speech that we heard by Senator Wu was very convincing, and he has a lot of facility with words. But I would like to ask him a question which follows the identification of the following problem. It would seem that the issue stems from the fact that there is excess demand for some seats in committee, and so when a senator leaves a group, it would harm another colleague's excess demand would... The interpreter regrets the sound quality is inadequate. That has nothing to do with the solution that Senator Wu is proposing, which is restricting the mobility of senators to have an impact on excess demand. Do you think there is not another rule for a committee that, for a group that feels harmed by the departure of a senator, and that is Rule 12.2, which recognizes that it's the Senate that attributes seats and recognizes that it is the Senate that can remove the seat from a senator. Rules 12.2c that you cited is a rule that seeks to change the composition if the senators of a group are in agreement. There can be a replacement if a senator cannot attend. That rule is simply an administrative one. Why not use 12.24 when there is an issue with the mobility when a senator leaves and you feel that your group was harmed?
Those of us who are unilingual heard that the interpreter had some difficulty with the translation, but I think I got the question, and I will repeat the question as I understand it. Senator Bellemare is asking whether there's another way to solve the, let's call it the procedural fairness problem that I've articulated. If a senator leaves a group and there's excess demand in the group, rather than stopping portability, why don't we get the Senate to use its powers through 12-2 to basically reappoint some senator to redress whatever imbalance that resulted from the movement of that said senator. And I hope, Senator Bellemare, I have accurately summarized your question. And the answer to that question is that what, in effect, you're proposing is renegotiations. That's what it boils down to. If you are saying that every time a member from one group leaves that group and takes a seat with him or with her, and that the remedy for the imbalance in the group that used to have the senator's membership, the remedy is for the Senate to then make a fix writ large. We are essentially talking about the Senate as a whole trying to find a solution to filling one or more seats in the absence of a comprehensive solution. Where that will lead, I am sure, is essentially a wholesale renegotiation of Senate seats. There may be special circumstances where the Senate can agree for some extenuating circumstances when somebody has to vacate a seat, they will unanimously agree to appoint somebody else into that seat. But in the event that that cannot be done, it essentially boils down to the problem I articulated before, which is that you will force the Senate as a whole to try and solve a problem that is best solved by groups and within groups. And that's why, Senator Belmar, I don't think 12-2 is the solution to the portability problem.
As a supplementary.
Senator Belmar, I'm sorry. When you don't use your microphone, we can't hear you. Senator Belmar.
Speaker, for this supplementary. Now, my question is that it's very difficult to intervene in the paradigm of Senator Wu, which take into account that the group owns the seat, the group negotiate, and the senator don't have any role to play on that, and the Senate especially don't have any role to play in that. The truth is that in the old system, if there was a rule that protected independence, it is this rule of portability. So my supplementary question to Senator Wu, what would be a Senate that is more independent and less partisan, as the ISG Charter has claimed that it wants to be? How do you imagine a vision where the senator will be privileged in his capacity to exert independently his work in the Senate?
And I want to thank Senator Belmar for her consistent reflections on how to modernize the Senate and how to make it more independent. She is one of our deepest thinkers on these issues, and I salute her for that. Before I answer a specific question, let me challenge one of her premises. She said that the group negotiations process and the group committee allocation process essentially leaves the senator out of that decision making. That is not true. It is not true in two respects. First of all, I speak for the ISG. ISG members design the process. I am the servant of the process. ISG members agreed on what the process would be and asked the facilitators and the secretariat to administer it. So they had a say in the very shaping of the process. Secondly, having shaped the process, they expressed their views on which committees they wanted. I'm sure it's the same for other groups. You've got some similar system, first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. So they had a lot of say. But once they did that, then they subjected themselves to the rules that they agreed on. They designed, many of them, because not everyone was there at the creation. But most ISG members were involved in the design of a system that they signed on to, which they then participated in. And that is why there is an obligation to be respectful and responsible in following the process. My second point is this, before I get to your actual question. While I've described a kind of iron logic that requires seats to be given up when a senator leaves a group, you may have heard me say that this is not a logic that has to be employed every time a senator leaves a group. In fact, there could and perhaps likely would be many circumstances where a senator leaving a group, I can only speak for the ISG, would not be asked to relinquish that seat because there's no excess demand within the ISG. Or maybe there is such a compelling case for that member to be on the committee, to stay on the committee, that there is no need to apply the non-portability rule. But it is the principle of non-portability that has to be put up front, because that is how the system can have integrity. Let me get to your question then of how we see a more independent Senate and all. This is a huge question, of course, and I thought I touched on some aspects of it. But let me repeat my central point. There is no incompatibility between a group that is cohesive, that has strong rules of procedure and rules of conduct, no contradiction between a group that implements its procedures in a disciplined and rigorous way, and senators being independent. Being independent to vote as they please, to say what they please, to introduce motions and bills as they. There is no contradiction between having strong groups and strong senators. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. Some people think that having strong groups means a diminution of the individual senator's right. This is the view we heard. A group is there to serve the senator. The senator is not there to serve the group. Obviously, there's a balance. But if you ask me where I lean in the direction of having well-functioning groups based on strong principles which protect the independence and the equality of senators.
Senator McFedrin.
Thank you, Your Honour. You'll take a question, Senator Wu? Yes. Thank you very much. So I want to go back to something I referenced in my speech last evening, and thank you very much for your communication when you acknowledged that you had listened to my speech. You then will recall I referenced a speaker's ruling on 12.5, and I won't go into all of the long detail, but one very specific statement I'm going to ask you to interpret based on the position you've taken about group ownership of the individual member's position. It says, if a senator withdraws from a caucus, Rule 12-5 would cease to apply. The senator would retain any then current committee membership unless removed either through a report of the Committee of Selection or a substantive motion adopted by the Senate.
Thank you for that question. And by the way, thank you for accepting our offer of a seat on the Fisheries Committee. I was distressed to hear last night that you had not gotten any committees. It was my understanding that all groups as part of the negotiations would look after senators that were non-affiliated. As soon as I found out, I gave you some options, and I'm glad you've accepted one of them. With respect to your question, I may be mistaken in my interpretation of the rules, but if we were to pass this SELI report, then I think that application would no longer be in effect, because a senator who is named under the auspices of a group would be subject to the non-portability of that seat. But of course, that's a decision for this chamber to make, and I won't prejudge our vote on this report.
Senator McFedrin, before you ask a supplementary, Senator Wu, your time is just about up. Are you asking for 5 more minutes? Because I see there are a couple of more senators that would like to ask questions. Anybody opposed to leave, please say no. Okay, supplementary, Senator McFedrin.
Thank you very much. And on this theme of clarification and your interpretation, it's my understanding from our correspondence that when I wrote back and set out a scenario whereby if I accepted your offer, which I did very much appreciate, that it would be under the current rules because we had not yet voted. So could you explain, please, the conditions that you set on your offer of membership?
Senator Wu.
Well, you know, I'm hesitant to share private correspondence, but you're inviting me to. So by all means, I believe what I said to you was that we are pleased for you to have the seat, and it will be subject to whatever decisions the Senate makes as a whole on the portability or non-portability of seats. So to me, that would imply that if this report is passed, then seats would stay with the group should you choose to leave. I also said in my email to you, I'm certain that I don't want to say it would be extraordinary, but we should not expect that we would take seats away willy-nilly. In fact, I have an expectation that should you choose to do something different and the question of your seat came up, we would talk to you about it and we would try to find you another seat. But that's only if perhaps a new member joining the Senate, maybe we'll get somebody with extraordinary fisheries experience, even better than Senator Manning, joining our group, and that person really, really wants to join fisheries. In that circumstance, we may say to you, Senator McFedrin, can we work something out? But this is not about punishment or vengeance. It's not about some kind of power trip. It's about finding solutions. We're all about finding solutions, but we need the tools to find solutions, and I believe this Selly report gives us one of those tools.